On the high seas, where legends are born and fortunes are won, there sails a captain unlike any other. This is the tale of Captain Finn, the fiercest pirate to ever command a vessel, the terror of the seven seas, a man whose name alone could make merchant sailors abandon their cargo and flee. His ship, the Sea Serpent, was a specter of dread, its black flag a promise of plunder. But on the deck of this mighty ship, its formidable captain had a secret, a weakness so profound it defied all logic. Captain Finn, the conqueror of the waves, was utterly, hopelessly, terrified of water. You could see it in the way he moved, a strange, rigid dance on the weathered planks of his own deck. While his crew, a boisterous and salty lot, leaned over the railings, spitting into the churning blue below, Finn would stay firmly planted in the center of the ship, as far from the edge as possible. He'd grip the mainmast like a lifeline, his knuckles white, his eyes darting nervously at the endless expanse of ocean that was both his kingdom and his prison. The slightest splash from a rogue wave would make him jump, a flinch so quick most would miss it. But it was there, a crack in the granite facade of the legendary pirate captain. His crew just thought he was eccentric. The captain's got his ways, they'd mutter, shrugging it off. They had no idea their fearless leader would rather face a whole fleet of Navy warships than get his boots wet. This bizarre phobia wasn't just a quirk, it was a deep-seated terror, born from a memory he kept locked away in the darkest corners of his mind. A long time ago, when he was just a boy named Finn, not yet a captain, he had been playing on the docks of a bustling port. He was small, reckless, and fascinated by the big ships. He'd slipped, a tiny misstep on a wet plank, and plunged into the cold, unforgiving sea. The shock of the icy water stole his breath. He thrashed and panicked, the world turning into a blurry nightmare of green and black. The weight of his clothes pulled him down, the salt water burning his eyes and throat. He saw the light of the sun fade as he sank, the surface a shimmering, unreachable ceiling. Just as his lungs were about to burst, a fisherman's rough hand had grabbed him by the scruff of his collar and hauled him out. He lay on the dock, coughing up water, shivering not just from the cold but from a primal fear that had now taken root in his soul. From that day on, the sea was no longer a place of adventure. It was a monster waiting to swallow him whole. Years later, as Captain Finn, he'd built an entire life around avoiding that monster. His crew found his habits baffling. Why did the captain insist on a gangplank that was almost as long as the ship itself, stretching precariously to the dock just so he wouldn't have to get too close to the water's edge? Why did he refuse to participate in the traditional keel-hauling punishment, opting instead for a less watery, though equally unpleasant, round of cleaning the bilge? And his bathing routine was the stuff of legend. He'd have a small barrel of fresh water brought to his cabin, which he'd use sparingly with a sponge, treating it like a precious jewel. Rain was his nemesis. The moment a storm cloud appeared on the horizon, Finn would retreat to his cabin, leaving his first mate, a grizzled old sea dog named Silas, in charge. The crew just chuckled. Captain doesn't like a drizzle, they'd joke. They saw a quirky, eccentric leader. They didn't see the little boy, gasping for air, drowning in a memory. One fateful evening, the sky turned a sinister shade of bruised purple. The air grew heavy, thick with the promise of violence. It wasn't just a squall. It was a tempest, a raging beast of a storm that descended upon the Sea Serpent without mercy. The wind shrieked through the rigging like a banshee, and the waves, once gentle swells, rose into monstrous, liquid mountains. They crashed over the deck, sweeping away barrels and coiling ropes like they were children's toys. The ship groaned and creaked, its timbers screaming in protest as it was tossed about on the furious ocean. The crew, hardened sailors all, were thrown into a state of pure panic. Men slipped on the slick deck, their shouts swallowed by the roar of the storm. The mainmast splintered with a deafening crack, and the sails, ripped to shreds, flapped like the tattered wings of a dying bird. Chaos reigned. Down in his cabin, Captain Finn was frozen. He could feel every lurch, every violent shudder of the ship as if it were his own body being torn apart. The sound of the waves crashing against the hull was the roar of the monster from his childhood. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. He could hear the desperate cries of his men, a symphony of fear that pierced through the storm's fury. He saw their faces in his mind, men who had followed him, trusted him, believed in him, and in that moment, something shifted. The fear was still there, a cold, heavy stone in his gut. But another feeling rose to meet it, responsibility. These were his men. This was his ship. He was their captain. He couldn't let his personal demon destroy them all. He had to choose, drown in his fear, or fight for their lives. With a deep, shuddering breath, Finn burst out of his cabin and onto the chaotic deck. Water immediately soaked him to the bone, the cold shock sending a jolt of pure panic through him. For a second, he faltered, the old terror threatening to drag him down. But then he saw Silas, his first mate, struggling to keep a hold of the helm as a massive wave threatened to sweep him overboard. The sight of his friend in peril snapped him out of his trance. "Silas, hold on," he roared, his voice barely audible above the tempest. He scrambled across the tilting deck, his boots slipping, his body screaming in protest with every cold splash. He grabbed the helm, his hands finding purchase next to Silas's. "I've got it," he yelled. The crew, seeing their captain, their reclusive, water-hating captain, standing at the wheel, soaked and defiant, felt a surge of hope. Terror and determination wired within him. His whole body trembled, but his grip on the wheel was iron. He stared into the face of the storm, into the churning, black water that had haunted his dreams, and he fought. Tighten the mizzen lines, secure that loose cannon. He bellowed, his voice cracking but firm, cutting through the chaos. He wasn't just steering the ship, he was battling his own soul. Every wave that crashed over him was a physical blow, a reminder of the day he almost drowned. But with every order he gave, with every degree he turned the wheel to meet a towering wave, he was taking back control. He wasn't the helpless boy anymore, he was Captain Finn, and he would not let the sea claim his ship. He navigated the treacherous waters with a desperate skill, his knowledge of the sea clashing with his fear of it, creating a strange, brilliant dance of survival. Slowly, painstakingly, the storm began to lose its fury. The wind's shriek softened to a mournful howl, and the mountainous waves subsided into angry, rolling hills of water. As the first rays of dawn broke through the bruised clouds, an eerie calm settled over the ocean. The sea serpent was battered and broken, but it was still afloat. The crew, exhausted and bruised, looked at their captain. He was still at the helm, drenched and shivering, his face pale, but his eyes were clear. They saw not a man who was afraid of water, but a man who had faced his greatest fear to save them all. A new kind of respect, deeper than any they had felt before, bloomed in their hearts. They didn't cheer, the moment was too solemn for that. Instead, a silent, profound understanding passed between captain and crew. Later that day, the sea serpent limped towards the nearest port for repairs. Captain Finn was in his cabin, the driest, safest place on the ship. He had changed into dry clothes, but a slight tremor still ran through his hands. On the table in front of him lay a map of the islands, a half-empty cup of grog beside it. He stared at the parchment, tracing a future route with his finger, planning his next move. He was still a pirate, still a captain. He was also still a man who was terrified of water. But something had changed. He had faced the monster and survived. He hadn't conquered his fear, not entirely, but he had learned to sail alongside it. He took a long sip of his grog, the warmth spreading through him, and kept his eyes on the map, as far from the windows and the sea as he could possibly get. The legend of Captain Finn was now complete. Not just a fearsome pirate, but a man who found his greatest courage in his deepest fear. Thanks for watching our story today. If you enjoyed this pirate's tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more adventures. Let us know in the comments what you think of Captain Finn. We'll see you in the next video.